It's time for a new evolution in raising golfers, one that doesn't involve headaches, tears, or heading down the path of unknown. Whether you're trying to introduce children to the game of golf, help them play competitively, or play at a collegiate level, you're in the right place. This show is for any parent, player, or coach who wants to build a better team at home and on the golf course. This is the Raising Golfers Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Raising Golfers Podcast. I am your host, Travis Hauser, PGA professional here in Carlsbad, California. This week, I'm so excited to have Mel Sampat back on the podcast. He was here in Season 2 speaking about how he was raising his young golfers in the game. He is also an active listener of the podcast, and from what I've seen, Mel has a growth mindset and is constantly educating himself in so many ways, including how to best raise his children. So he will also share some of his big takeaways from what he has learned, and he always has so many great resources for us to look into. Today, he and I are going to talk about what has changed recently with him raising his children in the game of golf, and then some of his great ideas for scoring with young junior golfers. All right, Mel, I'm so excited to have you here back on the podcast. It's really good to have people come back onto the podcast for more than one episode because, I think the first thing is that we see eye to eye in so many ways in raising golfers, and there's so many topics that we can discuss and talk about. And you being a parent of two young golfers, you're right there on the front line with these young junior golfers, and you really experience raising these golfers. So you've got a lot to share and a lot of cool ideas. And I'm sure every day, you come home from the golf course or the park, or wherever it may be with your children, you've got these new ideas that spark. And I think having you share those with us is going to be exciting. So thanks for joining us again, Mel.
You're welcome, Travis. I'm really glad to be back, and exactly what you said. It's great to talk to another dad, another golfer who's raising kids. And I'm sure, there are listeners out there who have older kids who've got teenagers, and they're looking at us like, oh, you guys have babies, you know nothing. But hopefully some of the things we talk about apply to golfers, junior golfers of all ages, and not just 6-year-olds and 4-year-olds.
Oh, absolutely. I think so. Yeah. I think about the same thing as well. And I'm sure there's things as fathers that we will obviously learn, and those hiccups will come across as they do get older. But I do think some of the things don't change, as far as the ideas of, really creating these positive experiences for these golfers first, right? Whether they are 6 years old or whether they're 12 years old. And I think that can stay consistent for sure. So yeah, I totally agree with you. You, it's been a little while since we had our last conversation. What kind of new golf adventures have you guys been on or experiencing, or activities recently that might be new? What have you guys been up to?
Sure. Yeah. So I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I try to keep them active in golf, at least 2 or 3 times a week. I'll take them to the park, hit some balls. These days it's been getting dark a little early, so I try to take them before school.
Oh, that's cool.
On our way to school, we'll stop at the park, we'll hit some balls. My 4-year-old is just obsessed with Star Wars. I think I mentioned this earlier in a previous episode. So what he likes to do is he'll have his bike parked about 50 yards away from us, and he'll start hitting balls towards it, and he'll pretend like the balls are X-wings and fighter jets and stuff flying at the bike. He loves that. I can't get him to stop doing that.
That's cool.
He doesn't want to go to school. He'll just say, "Can I hit 50 more balls?"
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I have to drag him away from the park and say, "Kid, it's time to go to school. You hit enough balls today." And it's great, but you got to keep coming up with stuff like that, because soon he's going to get bored of that, and he's going to want to do something else. So
that's great. Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that just ties in. Just if there's any new listeners coming on the podcast, with my mini golfers, they're age 3 and 4, and then 5 and 6. It's 2 classes I run, and I think I got this from Kate Tempesta. She's from Birdie Basics, and basically said we're wired for story. And so in those classes, I also do a lot of story-based learning, story-based golf experiences, and that's pretty much exactly what you're doing right there with your youngest. And that's what keeps them engaged, and that's why they want to hit 50 more balls. It may not even be the fact that he wants to necessarily play golf per se, right? And I'm not just saying your son, I'm just saying just generally with children. A lot of times they're learning golf without even realizing they're learning golf because of these other things related to story. And I think that's so important. Awesome that he's having that experience and you're providing that for him. So that's really cool, Mel.
Yeah, you have to use it while it lasts, because my 6-year-old won't fall for that trick anymore. She, if I tell her, hey, here's a princess castle and you're hitting, you're shooting balls into the castle, she won't have that. She's like, no, Dad, this is golf. Just say it's golf. So man, just milk it while you can, because
That's
then you got to
great.
come up with something else.
That's great. I love that. That's a really good idea. I appreciate you sharing that. So then, with those, early morning experiences since our last conversation, have you learned anything new about raising your young golfers since the last time we spoke?
My daughter just turned 6, and I realized that she's getting to the point where she's getting really good, and she's almost out of my my comfort level now, and I have to really hire a professional to take it from here.
Hmm.
So I've been looking around for a good coach and just start kind of lessons for her, maybe a small group or private. And I think, as a parent, you always have to look for when is the right time for you to step back and let someone else take over,
Hmm.
even though it's very tempting to think you can do it all and just keep working on it. You've got to know when the time is right.
That's yeah.
So
I totally agree. I'm curious, just from your parents' perspective, what kinds of things are you looking for in a coach right now for your daughter who's 6 years old?
yeah, so her swing is at a point where some things are inconsistent, and when I try to fix them, it gets to a point where she gets frustrated with
Hmm.
me, and because when I teach, I'm not a golf professional, and when I tell her things, sometimes the things I'm telling her don't line up, and she says, yeah, last time you told me not to do that, and this time you're telling me to do this, so which one is it?
Hmm.
And those are the moments when I feel like, right, I should probably know what I'm talking about when I'm telling you not to do this, and I'd rather have a coach fix that and tell you why that's the right thing to do.
Hmm.
Um,
Absolutely.
and so there are certainly roles that a parent can perform and should continue performing over the long term. Motivating a child, being a good role model, making time in their schedule, and all of those things. But there are things that you should leave to a professional when the time comes, and just kind of step back and let them take care of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's that part of it, and then there's just like the emotional connection with you being who you are, which is dad, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I've had this experience even with my own family members. Like, I don't give golf lessons to my brother, my dad. They see me as younger brother, they see me as son, they don't see me as golf coach, right? And because of that, I'm going to steer them in other directions. And it's not always the case, but I would say from what my experience being a golf coach, 90% of the time you see that a lot. And so there's the balance between those two things, like what you described there, as far as finding real professional help, but then also there's the emotional connection and the roles that children see us in as being parents. And so it's interesting you're going through that transition now. It's very interesting. Yeah, that's cool. I'm excited to hear what comes of it and what's in the future with that. So that's cool. And now let's hear a message from our show sponsor. Hey guys, this last spring I teamed up with Operation 36 here at our facility in Carlsbad, California, and it has completely changed my way of coaching and service to my customers. Operation 36 is a developmental golf program designed to take beginners from playing their first round to being able to shoot par or better for 9 holes. So here's how it works. Participants attend weekly 1-hour classes and work through a 6-level curriculum. They then play in 9-hole events once or twice a month with a common goal to shoot 36 or better from different distances. And using the Operation 36 app, coaches can plan programs, communicate with families, and track students' progress. It's really, really cool. If you're a parent listening, search for a program near you on their website at operation36.golf/juniors. And coaches, if you'd like to start a program at your facility, go to the same website, operation36.golf/coaches. Now, Mel, we're going to talk about a lot of scoring things today, and also a little bit about what we can do inside if it's cold outside, depending on where these listeners are in the world. On rainy days, anybody experiences those. Let's start with the scoring. I'm really curious, what you're doing with two young golfers, and I don't know if you're going to speak more for your older daughter, or younger son, or both of them, but the question I think I would have at this age or around this level of development would be, should you keep score, and if so, how would you suggest, or what have you found the best way to keep score at this stage where they're at right now?
Yeah. So the short answer to this, the TLDR version, Travis, is yes, you should keep score, especially when you're practicing. You need to keep score. For the long answer, I want to go into a book that we've recommended on this podcast in the past, which is Peak by Anders Ericsson.
Mm-hmm.
And in that book, so bear with me. I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the most interesting parts of this book.
Yeah, let's
He
hear it.
talks about an experiment they did on a guy named Steve Falloon. What they did was they taught this guy to memorize a sequence of digits. Just random digits like 5, 4, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. Just keep going and going and see how many of those he can memorize. Now, keep in mind, this guy wasn't a genius. He wasn't any kind of special human being. He was just some random guy from like a graduate class or something, and they just plucked him out of there and said, "Hey, we're going to teach you how to memorize a sequence of numbers."
Mm-hmm.
So, in the beginning, he was able to memorize 5, 6 digits, and over time, it got to 20, a couple dozen, and then eventually, by the end of this whole series of experiments, he was able to memorize 82 completely random digits and then recite them back to his to the person conducting the experiment. Now, the reason I share this is because the way they went about this was they didn't have him come into the lab every day and say, "Hey, Steve, let's see what you can do today, and we'll see how many you can memorize. Then come back tomorrow. We'll do some more." If that sounds familiar, that sometimes that's how we take our kids to the driving range and say, "Let's see, hit some balls today. Let's see, have a little fun." And you'll try to do better tomorrow. But that's not the way they trained this guy. They kept track of exactly how many digits he was able to memorize. And when he came back the next day, they said, "Okay, so you did 20 yesterday. Let's see if you can do 21 today and 22 the next day," and slowly build up to as many as he can do. This is called peak. This is called deliberate practice. Peak is the name of the
Mm-hmm.
book, but this whole the way they did this is called deliberate practice, and it's all about performing and practicing at the limits of your abilities.
Mm-hmm.
If you are constantly practicing in your comfort zone, for Steve, it would have been, 5 digits, or what most humans can memorize as a phone number, like 7 digits or 10 digits. He wouldn't have gotten better. He would have successfully memorized any combination of 7 or 10 digits, but he would never have gotten beyond that. The
Mm-hmm.
reason he was able to get better and better over time is because he kept performing and practicing at the limits of his ability. Now, this is what we want to do when we are practicing golf or tennis or any kind of skill that requires a certain amount of practice, deliberate practice. You always want to practice at the maximum or just past the maximum ability you have right now. And
That's
you can't do that. You can't do that unless you know what your maximum is. What is your current ability, and how do you perform just past that? In fact, in the book, the author talks about how if you only practice at your comfort level, not only do you not get better, but you actually get worse over time. You get worse
interesting.
because, yeah, your body just adapts to performing at that level, and gradually you lose whatever you've built up, and you just get worse over a long period of time. But you certainly don't get better. And so, it's if you want to get better and better, you have to keep performing at the limits of your abilities, and to do that, you need to know where you currently are. And that's why I think it's really important to track your practice. And we'll talk about some ways you can do that, what to track. We'll talk about all of those. Um, but before we get there, I want to say one more thing. There, as important as it is to keep score, it is equally important to not keep score.
Mm.
You want to give your kids games and practice sessions where you're not tracking anything and you're just having fun, and that's a huge part of it. That
Absolutely.
there have to be stress-free moments.
For sure. There needs to be a balance for sure. Now, I'm going to backtrack with the book because I read the book myself and I remember that experiment. And I remember thinking, you know, they were actually listing out some of the numbers, like the random numbers they were putting out in the experiment, right? And I was thinking, like, just in my head, I was doing that. And I'm like, I could probably by the end of today get to maybe, I don't know, maybe up to 10 or something like that. But I remember that experiment, but I'm going to also play it back to something I just mentioned on one of the previous episodes, talking about goals and talking about like almost having these like stretch goals where basically they kind of stretch you to, a limit where maybe the task at hand or during the process, it's a little bit challenging, not overbearing, but at the same time, it's not too easy.
and boring where you decide just also to walk away from it. So what you described there and what you described in the book, and I think what you're relating to also with just practice and scoring as well with junior golfers is that it does kind of have to push them to it has to push them a little bit further and a little bit further than they actually think they can get to, and stretch their goals and their ability to where there's actually a challenge at hand. Now, of course, it's very delicate, especially during certain ages, of how to do that. And I think there's a lot of different activities that you can do and practices in junior golf. I'll give one, for example. I did this activity. It's called One Step Away. And basically, it's a challenge where you take one step away from the hole, you put a ball down, and you have to make the ball in the hole in one or two putts. If you do that, then you take two steps away. And then if you make it in one or two putts again, then you do three steps away from the hole. And it keeps progressively moving further and further away. So then it begins to stretch your limits as far as how far away you can get it to make one or two putts to get in the hole. And if you keep track of that, you might remember, okay, so last week in 5 minutes, I got to 6 steps away. Let's see if I can get to 7 steps away this time. And again, I think that's kind of a similar balance of what you're saying there.
Yeah, it sounds just like they trained this guy to remember a sequence of digits. I mean, that's exactly what they did.
Right.
When you're doing this with juniors, it helps in a different way. If you write that down, that score down from a previous session, you bring it to your current session, you can show the kid this is where you were last time. It gives them a number, which is something more tangible than just an abstract idea of what they're supposed to do. And then with that number, they know mentally what they're aiming for. Whether it's 6 steps or 20 steps, and they know that this is what the goal of what they've come to do to the golf course is.
Right. I think so. I think that's spot on. Exactly. So then, share, what have you been doing recently with your children, like in line with that? Like what kind of activities or tasks or tracking have you done, and how's that been going?
Yeah, so we do simple things. I'll the most basic thing I'll do is I'll take 20 balls and take them out of the bucket that we get in the driving range. Just put only 20 balls down on the black mat and say, okay, so our goal for this is to we pick a goal, whether it's distance or accuracy or direction or swing quality, whatever it is. First we'll go with distance. Let's just go with distance. I'll say, okay, so Reina, your goal is to hit 70 yards. And let's see how many of these 20 balls you can get to 70 yards. Last time you hit 12. This time, let's see if you can do 15. It's really, really simple. And, for a 6-year-old, those numbers make perfect sense. These are small numbers. They're not exceeding 20. And she kind of has an idea of what 70 yards and 100 yards are. So that's what we start with. The next thing we'll start with, and the next thing we'll do is, okay, here's a pitching wedge. You see that flag that's 30 yards away? Let's see how many balls you can land right by the bottom of that flag or within a few feet of that flag. And then I'll keep track of that as a separate game, making sure I don't combine that with the previous game. And then the next thing I'll do is, similar things. I'll just do, let's see how many balls you can hit without slicing them left and right, and just keep track of what percentage of balls don't slice. The important thing is for kids at this age, I break down these skills into separate games. I don't combine them together because if you try to go for distance and non-slices and loft and all of those things into a single game, it can be overwhelming. So just break the games down and track 4 different metrics as opposed to just one, for perfect shots, and just see how far you can go. And then you can always evolve these games. As your junior develops, you're moving the goal from 70 yards to 100 yards, or if you're or you can factor in the non-slicing aspects of the shot into the distance game. But initially, when you have younger kids, it's best to just keep these games separate and focus on one goal at a time.
Right. I think there's a couple things I want to touch on here. So first one is, I would say a lot of that sounds like, task-based learning. So it's basically a task at hand. Now there is a goal too, but there's a task, and it's just like, okay, you just got to here's 20 balls. Let's try to get 12 past 70 yards today, right? That's the task that's at hand, right? And I think what's good about this, and like you said, sometimes, you don't want to get too many things going on so it's not overwhelming, right? I coach a lot like this, where I might talk about a technical area within the game, within the swing. So I'll talk about a technical area within the golf swing, right? Or a concept of how to get the ball in the air, a concept of how to strike the ball in the center of the club face, or a concept of how to control where the club hits the ground in front of the ball. So ball first, contact, ground second. But then I take a step back and say, okay, we've talked about this. you've learned about this. Now, sure, you haven't perfected it, but now here's the task or here's the goal. Now just run with it, right? And I would say that's a very good way of coaching lightly and getting the message across to young junior golfers. Now, that's just one way, right? Then you also have like games-based learning as well. And that would be different, where then it turns into a game, like things you've been doing with Star Wars with your younger son, those types of activities, right? And I think that's really, really cool. Now, my follow-up to you as being a dad would be, how do things go when she doesn't reach the goal or the task? Let's just say she had 12 shots out of the 20 last time to 70 yards, but this time she has 10. What do you guys talk about? How does that go?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I wish I knew a really good answer to that. There isn't. It's
Right.
different every time. Sometimes it can be false praise. Yeah, yeah. It's where you praise the effort. Pray, just
Hmm.
just tell them that, well, you tried really hard, and sometimes even grown-ups can't do what they came to do.
Hmm.
Let's go get some food. Let's go have a snack, and try to just celebrate the fact that we're on the golf course. Point out some squirrels, or point out some other kids who are struggling, or just try to think positive.
Right.
uh, it always helps to have a good snack after, or take the kid to a favorite place to eat. And that reminds me, it's always good to have a fallback plan in case things don't go as planned. Have a restaurant in mind where there isn't a big wait, so you can
100%.
quickly get down to business.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. I think when you do that and you reward not necessarily whether you passed the goal or not, right, or shot the score or not, it's you're really encouraging the process more than you are just the outcome, right?
Yeah.
And so if they can always fall back on, like you said before, the M&Ms, right, or fall back on their favorite restaurant, or fall back on, hey, we're gonna get ice cream today, right? That shows and sends a clear message to the juniors that this is a process. You're working on the process. You gave your best effort. I know you didn't achieve the goal today. Nothing is linear, but you gave your best effort, and look, we're still celebrating those small wins.
Of course, and just by the mere fact that you're keeping score means there will be disappointment. But I think the benefits of this process of tracking your progress is worth the pain you're going to feel sometimes when there is disappointment to deal with.
Mm, for sure. 100%. Have you seen any trends with, let's just say what some of the tasks that you have for your daughter, like after tracking it over a period of time? Have you noticed any connections and trends, whether let's just say she performs better in the mornings or performs better in the afternoons based on her energy level, or scores that she's had, or related to weather or anything else emotionally? Have you seen any trends after tracking it for a period of time?
Yeah, yeah, totally. Besides the driving range practice, I'll also track her games, and
Mm.
we discussed this at length in a previous episode where I talked about the scorecard that I use. So yeah, I do track these things, and I also track her score while playing. And I've noticed that she actually plays better when we're paired up with random people. She plays worse when she's playing just with me. So I
Interesting.
almost,
That's
I
very
almost
interesting.
wish that the golf course would pair us up with two random people when we go out to play, because then she has a little bit of a incentive to perform,
Right.
instead of when she's just with dad.
Understood.
Of course, the weather helps, and other variables like having had a nice breakfast, all those things help. But I think the biggest driver has been having people with us.
That's fascinating, isn't it? And imagine too if all of a sudden then it's with her friends with her as well, right? And I've found this as well as some of my junior golfers in my program, how they perform when they're paired up with their friends versus how they perform when they're paired up with just some other players. And I ask a lot of junior golfers, I need to bring some of these juniors onto my podcast, because just talking to them and asking them these questions about, I ask them, I say, why do you like golf? What is it about golf that you like? And like, you see research online that says why children like sports, and it's totally true. Number one, because my friends do it.
Yeah.
Number one, right? Why do you like to go on the golf course and play on the golf course? Oh, because my friends are out there with me and it's fun, or I like the challenge. Those kinds of things, those always come up, right? So even though you get paired with people you don't know, it just creates this like environment, like you said, that gives her extra incentive to perform. And that environment pushes us as humans to, perform a task or perform at hand or whatever it may be, right? And so it's fascinating that she probably subconsciously feels the environment is different when it's just you and her versus when there's other people paired up. And for whatever reason, you've seen that trend in the scores. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and the opposite is true too. So when we've played with a couple of her school friends, and it gets worse when
Is
she's
that
playing
right?
with her. Yeah, they just want to
Goof around.
be crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I try to discourage playing with her friends, at least at this age. I'm sure it gets it turns into the opposite as the kids get older, and when they're closer to teenagers, they actually enjoy playing. They perform better when they're playing with their friends. But in kindergarten, man, you can't keep a couple of kindergartners focused on golf.
Well, maybe those rounds, maybe you can still do them, but maybe the outcome there isn't necessarily the performance or the score, but more just the experience for her of just having a good time at the golf course, and then just having a balance of that back and, a little bit here and there. And that way it kind of keeps the golf course experience still as like, oh, this is such a great thing because, sometimes I go out and play with my friends, sometimes I don't. But my image of what the golf course is a fun thing, So
Yeah,
maybe
yeah, it goes back to what I said. There are some games you just don't even bother trying to keep score because it's
right.
just going to skew your average way lower.
Right, exactly. When they're chasing all the birds and the ducks and stuff like that, at
Yeah,
that age, right?
yeah,
It's
just throw
like,
away the scorecard.
yeah, there's no point, right? Sometimes they even forget that their ball's in the green and they just go to the next tee box or whatever, right?
Yep, yeah.
That's great. Okay, so you're tracking these scores, whether it's driving range activities, course play activities. What are you using to track the scores? Like, how are you collecting all this information?
Sure, sure. So ultimately, the stuff has to end up in some digital way. Whether I've used everything. I've used Google Docs as a spreadsheet. I've used an iPhone app called Tally, which is just a way to capture numbers across anything you want to track, even glasses of water you drink. There's another free service called Airtable that lets you basically make a database with any columns and rows you want to define, and then you can track whatever metrics you want. So you can have your pick. And for golf games, I use Golf Shot. That's a really nice app. It's free if you don't want to use their GPS capabilities and just use it as a scorecard. So it's a really good way to track your scores. So these are great. The caveat, though, is that I don't do any of this digital stuff, iPhone stuff, on the golf course. On the golf course, I basically have a pencil and paper, maybe a clipboard when I go to the driving range. The reasons are it can be very distracting to pull out a phone every couple minutes to enter a score. Even if the phone turns off and then the kid thinks you're playing with your phone or you're getting distracted, you can see an email come in and you can just totally lose your focus on what you're there for. Another thing is, carrying a clipboard and a piece of paper with you can show the kid, you can show your son or daughter, here's the goal, keep your mind on this. But on a phone, if you show it to them, their minds just starts thinking about YouTube and, the things that like to do on your phone.
Yeah, it's
So,
distracting.
so yeah, I wouldn't do any kind of score tracking with a smartphone on the golf course. So yeah, you just use pen and paper when you get back home. You can digitize the scores and whatever analytics app you want. The simplest one is just Google Docs with their spreadsheets.
I like that. Okay, I'll share those in the show notes as well. All right, so those are some really good ideas and cool things that you're doing as far as keeping score and tracking. And again, Mel, just like last time when I'm having this conversation with you, it starts to spark some ideas for me, what I can do with my own children, and then also for my students in my golf classes. And just to let you know, I have taken on the idea of the scorecard that you shared with me last time. And it's really, really cool. We think of new ideas of, okay, we're on the golf course. We have a few golf related tasks, but let's make sure we see an airplane. Let's make sure we can find a squirrel and see a bird. And we've had a few funny situations where we get all the golf related things off the task. We find a few of the things and it's like, okay, we haven't seen a squirrel. So then if we have a golf cart, we'll just ball them around the course somewhere until we find a squirrel, right? And then check that off. And I'll tell you what, my oldest son, he is so excited, right? He's not thinking necessarily about the golf and the performance and all that so much. But again, it's just creating this positive environment. So again, some really cool ideas there. And yeah, it's awesome, these ideas of how to track and then again, kind of stretching those goals already in a very, very gentle way, even starting at a young age. So great ideas. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
All right. Moving to the next section, you've talked about some suggestions that you've had, whether it's indoor practice, things you can do at home, or, again, listeners around the world, some people right now are listening, they're looking outside and they got 6 feet of snow outside. What kind of activities would you suggest to keep junior golfers engaged in the game during the winter or during times we can't go outside and play?
So there are lots of things you can do within your house that are golf related. The most obvious one is just get a putting mat. I mean, that's there's the cliche of the old CEO with a putting mat in his office.
Hmm.
The evil CEO of a company who's going to lay everyone off, and he's putting in his office. But it doesn't have to be like that. Your kids can have a blast putting balls into a little mat in the house. You should also be working on the golf swing, as everyone knows, the swing is so difficult, to master. There's so
Hmm.
many little moving parts, the how far back you go, and the hinge, and the twisting your wrist as you come in, and how far to follow back. And if you don't practice those things, what I found is they start to degrade even within a week. I found that if we don't work on our swing, it starts to get worse, and then when you come back to hit some balls, you have to cover some ground which you thought you already had. So I think just working on the swing, even during the winter, is pretty important. So you can get some plastic balls, which you can hit indoors, which hopefully don't damage your walls. But sometimes they do. Sometimes it's not the balls; it's the clubs. You're too close to a wall and you swing, and
Right.
it's the club that makes a ding in your wall, and then you get yelled at. Um, if you don't want to deal with plastic balls, you can always get a smash bag. It's one of those bags you can buy on Amazon for like 10 $15. You stuff it with old clothes, and you just start whacking away at it as hard as you can.
Mm.
It teaches a few different skills. It helps you work on your swing, but it also teaches you the confidence to come in much harder with a lot more force. Maybe Travis, you can talk about those smash bags and if they're appropriate for juniors.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to think about with junior golfers, in relation to that is speed. And speed is really, really important for junior golfers. And what's encouraged, at least from, fitness professionals, from what I have learned in the training courses that I've done, is that for junior golfers, speed's a really important thing. And I would say, just to sum that up, is if junior golfers can start to swing faster and harder, and let's just say there's no golf ball there, they begin to find the most efficient way to create speed. And ironically, that also can help with their form of their golf swing. So, to swing efficiently, obviously, from a very technical standpoint, the club has to travel on an ideal plane or path that the club comes down on. And that's going to help with that efficiency. So, for junior golfers, if you start doing things like that, speed training per se, it does actually help them develop and them naturally begin to find an efficient way to generate more speed. So, you have ground force reactions, you've got a lot of different things going on in the swing with torque. And again, just the kinematic sequence of the swing of, again, how different moving parts of the lower body, the upper body, the arms, the wrists all move in sequence, in ideal sequence. But in a very simplified manner, if you have a smash bag or if you've got other ways of training speed, again, it helps the junior golfers begin to naturally find that efficiency in their swing. And so I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, yeah, and just to add one more thing, if you don't even have a smash bag, or if you don't want to get one, you can still practice your swing, because you can pretend there's a ball there, and you can practice brushing against a rug or a mat on the floor. And what you're looking for is that brushing sound as your club slides over the rug or the mat. And you'll be surprised, even when I practice myself, there's so many times when I'll do that, and the club doesn't make contact with the floor, and I know I would have topped a ball that if had there been a ball there.
Right.
So merely doing that, helps you avoid the topped balls, and that's a pretty important thing to do when you're on the golf course.
Absolutely. Ball striking's the key of the game.
Yeah.
So, are you tracking any progress or anything related to indoor activities while your children are doing these things?
Not really. I mean, I tried. We have a bit of we have a putting mat, a pretty large one, and I thought about tracking that, but inside the house, it's not the same environment. They don't want to worry about how long they practice, and they just can't seem to focus enough in the house.
Hmm.
So in the house, it's just like you take what you can get. If I can
Right.
get 2 or 3 minutes of focus, then that's all I
It's
care
just
about.
keeping them engaged
Yeah.
in the game, right? And again, still keeping it positive, where maybe they start creating some of their own activities and games with on the putting mat, or on the smash bag, or whatever it may be, right? So okay, so that's awesome.
One more
And
thing I'll add, which is actually not golf related. My daughter's been taking some tennis lessons too, and her coach recommended this. It's this contraption. It's really cool. It's made by Billie Jean King, the former tennis player, world champion. Some people may have heard about her. So it's this like thing that it's a stationary tennis practice thing where you hit the ball, it just like swings back and comes back to you, so you don't have to go chasing after balls.
Mhm.
We keep that in the living room, and that's really easy to track. Your kid can just keep hitting balls, and we set a timer for 4 minutes or 5 minutes, and she'll hit about 80 tennis balls with this contraption. Of course, you can put a link to it in your show notes, and
Yes.
it's a really great way to develop a backswing. And some of the things you learn by playing tennis can also translate to golf. So that's a really cool training aid.
So you use it for golf and for tennis.
Well, we only use it for tennis. It doesn't use a golf club. It uses a tennis racket, obviously.
Okay.
So you can't use it for golf. But I think I wish there was something like that for golf. But to the extent that we use it, it's only for tennis.
I see. Okay, so yeah, I'll definitely share that in the show notes as well. That's great. And when your kids are doing these activities inside the house, is do you find it's less motivating for them to do activities in the house because of the other distractions? You mentioned you sometimes mention a time limit, or is there a best time of the day that you find that these activities in the house seem to work with your
Yeah,
children?
for
How do you
kids,
balance it out?
yeah, for kids this age, at least the ones that hate going to bed at night, it works best when it's time to go to bed, and they're like, "Hey, we don't want to go to sleep yet." So the choices are: you can hit a tennis ball for 5 minutes, or go do some putting practice for 5 minutes, or you're off to bed. So it works best at 8:30, or 8:15 when they have to go to sleep and there's nothing else.
I like that. All right, that's good. Now, some people decide, through the winter months, maybe it's a time to take a break from sports. What are your thoughts about taking breaks? Have you guys taken any breaks or stepped away for a few weeks or a month or whatever?
We haven't been playing golf for enough seasons to know what can happen if you take extended breaks. But as I mentioned earlier, there are times when, we'd go on vacation or traveling, we somehow end up not playing golf for a couple of weeks. And I've noticed that the swing does degrade. So, and that just might be because my kids are too young and they haven't mastered the swing enough that they can sustain a long, long break.
Mm,
Um, but I would think it does degrade for everyone. I've seen myself, if I take extended breaks, I have to re-familiarize myself with some of the things I used to know how to do when
right.
it comes to golf. So yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to get back into it, and I wish people would continue practice through the winter months if they can.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I mean, maybe what you could do is for listeners, is instead of taking like maybe a full on stop or a full on break, maybe just be like, okay, so we were practicing 3-4 times a week, maybe just to keep the interest level high enough, but at the same time not letting them step completely away from the game. Maybe let's just bring that down to 1 or 2 times a week, and through the winter months, just to kind of keep them still engaged with the game. And then then once sun's back out and we can get back outside, then that might be a time to go back into it. And that might even encourage them with just taking just a tiny little, not break, but just not as hardcore into the sport. It might encourage them to get more excited to come back and then start playing every day again.
Yeah, and of course it depends on what people's ultimate goals are. Golf isn't the only game, and there are games which are better suited for winter. You
Absolutely.
can, of course, focus on those games during the winter months, um, and come back to golf later. But if you want, especially if you're hoping to do tournament play, and if you're hoping to play at a more advanced level, then I wouldn't risk those skills degrading over the winter months.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Good suggestion there. So, Mel, recently you watched King Richard, and it's about Serena and Venus Williams, and I'm really curious to hear about your takeaways from this, because their father was the one who basically coached them through the sport all the way up into basically where they are today. I've seen some videos of them at a very young age that some of the local news channels did, and this is like dating back to, I want to say, the 1990s. So tell us a little bit about, what's this about first and foremost, and then we'll get into some of the details of your takeaways from it.
I'm sure that everything in this movie is based on reality, but there is a little bit of creative freedom there. So yeah, it's a great movie. I encourage any parent who's pursuing a sports career, or even just higher level sports success for their kids, watch this movie. It's like you said, it's about Richard Williams, who coached his two daughters, Serena and Venus Williams, when they were younger, and got them into playing professional tennis. So I can talk about some of my takeaways from the movie.
Absolutely.
First,
Yeah.
the big one is that behind most successful parent-child partnerships, parent-child athletic partnerships, is often a parent who is often unnoticed, unappreciated, underappreciated, and that's, in this case, it was their mom, and her name was Orsine Price. Most people haven't heard of her. Most people don't know that she's also a tennis coach, and she was instrumental in teaching Venus some of the foundations of tennis. She doesn't get as much credit as she deserves. Just like a lot of our spouses, it's usually the dads who take their kids to the golf course, but it's the moms or the other parent who is, doing all the other work, keeping the kids fed, keeping the kids healthy and emotionally balanced and well rested, and sleep and medicine and bandages, and just keeping the kids happy and ready to perform when they're out on the golf course. So I think, I want to give a big shout out to all the parents who are not physically at the golf course, but who do so much work behind the scenes to make sure that when the kids are on the golf course or on the tennis court, they can do their best.
Thank you for saying that. That's so true. I totally agree with you. Thinking about it deeply, it's so true. So it's so kind of you to share that and say that.
Yeah. Another takeaway is that a parent can often be the best first coach for a child. It helps if the parent themselves play the sport, because then they can be the inspiration and the role model for the child to pursue that sport. In the movie, you see that Richard Williams himself was a tennis player, and he spent a lot of time getting better at tennis himself. Before he got his daughters into tennis, so he knew a little bit about it, and he's not different from many of us here listeners who are not professional golf players, but they know enough about the game to introduce it to their children. But however, I will say that a parent's only job, and I think I touched on this earlier in this episode, a parent's job is not just to be a coach, but to eventually know when it's time to get out of the way. Two key moments in the movie are when Richard Williams introduces Venus to her first coach, and he had to try really hard for the coach to accept her. The coach had certain preconceived notions about who should be playing tennis, who he should be coaching, and he ran into a lot of resistance from coaches who would not accept Venus Williams as a player. But when they saw her play, they accepted her, and this happened multiple times. So, but it wouldn't have happened if Richard hadn't tried so hard to bring his daughters to the places where these coaches worked. So it's really important for a parent to recognize when the time is right to let the professionals take over and just take it from here.
That's great.
Yep. And then another fun thing about the movie, almost funny, is every time Richard would take the kids to take his daughters over to the tennis court, he put up a sign that says, if you fail to plan to fail, which is a total cliche. If you see that sign, it's been said a million times. But the point, the bigger point he's making is, you have to go into your practices with a plan, and if you don't have a plan, not just for that practice, but for the longer term, then you're really not accomplishing much. You're just hitting balls. And that applies to golf as well. Like I said earlier, keeping score, tracking your progress, all those things should be part of a bigger plan. And if you're not going to plan, then you're not getting much out of your time.
Mm. Yeah, that's
So
great.
yeah. So these are some of the takeaways, but it's just a good movie. It's not. I mean, my wife and I felt like they didn't give enough credit to the hard work that the girls did to improve their own tennis, and they gave maybe they gave a little too much credit to their father. But it's a movie, so.
Absolutely. Right. So well, it's interesting because, when you're mentioning these things and then what you've already talked about, what you've done with scoring and just some of the other activities that you're, thinking about doing with your daughter and then also seeking out for additional help with a professional coach. It sounds like some of these things you saw in the movie, maybe you're already thinking about, but you've already started implementing into some of the things that you
Yeah.
do with your daughter and raising your children in the game of golf. Is there anything that you learned from the movie that you would also, in addition to what you've already mentioned, plan to implement in raising your children in the game of golf?
I do think as a parent, you have to constantly be vigilant to the changing needs of your child. What
Mhm.
works for them right now or in the current moment might not work for them in 2 years when their skills have surpassed what their current coach can teach them, or their skills have surpassed the current plan that you have. In the movie, Serena and Venus Williams, she was playing tournaments, and she was playing those those club tournaments that we all know about, which just like the golf tournaments made by put on by U.S. kids. So there's a very clear analogy there to the tournaments we know about. But at some point, Richard Williams decided to pull his daughters out of those tournaments because Venus was winning every one of them, and she wasn't really learning much from those tournaments. So he took her out of the tournaments to focus on school and to focus on just letting her grow. Um, and so I think the takeaway there is you always have to be ready to change your plan and just keep looking out for what's next for the player. What would be the best choice for them right now, and is what we have right now good enough for what they're doing?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think I always say this: raising children just generally is a very delicate art, and there's a very fine line of, whether you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing in developing just these children to be great people. And, if the idea is to also help them with their golf game, it's still very delicate art. So, I think what you said there is really huge because I think having the idea that change might happen today or tomorrow, and that's okay, I think is a good mindset to have. And I would say personally, it's something that I think I need to think about deeper and realize myself, because I sometimes do get a fixed mind and a fixed track of how I imagine things are supposed to progress and go. And that's not just speaking as me as a coach or as a parent, but also as a coach. And I think being able to adapt to that and understand those things, I think is huge. And I think that'll also help children understand that change is also okay, right?
Yeah.
Change is okay. And I think that's huge for the development of children for sure. So that's a great point you brought up there. So, Mel, this is your second time here on the Raising Golfers podcast. You shared some really cool ideas and encouragement about, what you're doing with scoring, how you're tracking it, the importance of it, how we can even adapt it to different ages. You've given us some good motivation as well to practice at home. And, I really like how this kind of ties into goals. And this is the new year. We've got a new year, and I hope 2022 is the best year for listeners and raising their junior golfers to really have a positive encouragement and experience towards the game. And I think these things you've shared will really help us out for the new year. So, which is really, really cool. Thank you so much for coming on the Raising Golfers podcast and taking the time out of your day, and also being an avid listener to the podcast. And your ideas that you share is just huge. So, keep up the good work, and really look forward to hearing the progress of how things going with you and raising your golfers.
Thanks, Travis. Appreciate it.
All right, another fantastic interview with Mel Sampat here on the Raising Golfers podcast. I always enjoy the insight he has to share, and I always learn something new from him, whether it's being in the parent's role or in the coach's role, and it gives me so many ideas and encouragement and motivation to go out and try so many new things. And it just makes me realize that, in the pursuit of immersing children into the love of the game of golf, he always has these new really cool ideas and things that I always take away. So I hope you're the same. You took some good notes from this episode. Now, Mel talked about scoring, and scoring doesn't have to be so rigorous. It can be light, it can be fun, and it can be done in a different way. And he's got so many creative ideas and ways he does it with his children. I think it's motivating and encouraging and really gets them excited about the game of golf. Now, here's what I think you need to do if you're not already doing this with your junior golfers, is you need to keep the practice sessions light, make sure that they're having fun, and praise them on their effort, not on their results. Mel mentioned that things are constantly changing. Children are constantly developing, going through different developmental stages. And he said that you always have to be ready to change the plan and be on the lookout for what is best for our children. And I think if we have that open mind and we have the growth mindset and understand that, we might have to make some adjustments to the plan that we might have had in our head, I think it'll be really, really beneficial for the junior golfer. And I think for the relationship between you as a parent or coach with your junior golfers. Mel, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. Look forward to hearing your feedback and having you back on the podcast here next week.